Handling legal matters is stressful. So, let the law offices of Frank Bruno Jr. provide you with the insightful counsel you deserve. The law offices of Frank Bruno Jr. has successfully handled thousands of cases for 25 plus years. They focus on elder law and estate planning, but are equipped to navigate you through all stages of family law and divorce to real estate law and probate. The law offices of Frank Bruno. Call 718-418-5000 or visit them at frankbrunolaw.com. That's frankbrunolaw.com. Frank Bruno. He's your numero uno.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Good afternoon, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. Thanks so much for joining. This is the number one talk radio station in America, and I'm so thankful of my friend John Catsimatidis for giving me the honor to do 2 hours. We're on for 2 hours, folks, on the More Money Show on WABC and many affiliates. We have listeners from around the country. We know that because when we take call-ins, we get people calling in from Georgia, from Maine, from Chicago, Indiana. It's awesome. And so thank you so much for making this show a success. It is the highlight of my week to be in front of the microphone and talk to you about what is going on in America. And by the way, I say this every week that I am not the greatest talk show host, but I am so proud of the quality of the people that are willing to come on and speak to me and speak to you about what is going on in this great, great country of ours. So we have a great lineup today, folks. You've got to listen to the full 2 hours if you're available for it. So we're going to have on Sean Spicer. Sean Spicer, you guys know, was the first President Trump's first press secretary and did an amazing job. He has great stories, as always, about working with Trump. And he has a new film out that he's going to talk about called Trump's Front Row Joes. And these are the people who attend Trump rallies and trying to get into their minds and why it is that they are so supportive of Donald Trump and travel everywhere with him like they were going to a Beatles concert. They're groupies, basically. They're Trump groupies. And it's a wonderful story that he has put together. And so we're going to talk to Sean, and then we're going to talk to my buddy Steve Forbes, and my mentor, the top economist and one of the top business minds in the country. And so Steve Forbes will be coming on, and then we have Scott Bessent coming on a little later. Scott Bessent, by the way, is someone who could easily be Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary when he wins the election. And I think he will win the election, and a couple of other guests too. So really great lineup today. And as I said, I'm just so proud of the fact that so many smart people and so many people in the know are willing to come on the show. And so please tune in for the full 2 hours if you can. But I want to start by talking about what is going on with some of these lies and these outrageous statements of that are not factual. They're disinformation. They're misinformation. It's so funny. There's something called projection. And projection is where you accuse your enemy or someone else, it doesn't have to be an enemy, of your own behavior. And my wife says that I project all the time because I accuse her of something and she says, no, you do that. You're just accusing me of your own bad behavior. And in many cases, she is right. I am no saint, folks. And so anyway, projection is doing that, where you basically say the other person is doing what exactly you're doing. And that is what's going on with the left in so many instances in terms of their attacks against Donald Trump. So we saw two of these this week that got a lot of publicity. And I'm going to talk about these with some of the experts, but I have to unmask these myths right now, and then we'll talk more about them. The first one was this story about these 16 Nobel Prize economists who basically said that if Trump is reelected, he is going to cause inflation. It'll be Trump that's going to cause runaway inflation. I'm not making this up. That's what they say. Now, these happen to be, I mean, this is such an unbelievable story. And God honest truth, this is true. So these were the same 16 economists, most of them, not the exact same, but I think like 14 of the 16 also signed a letter about 3 years ago when Biden first came into office, saying that don't worry, that if Biden goes forward with all his spending plans, don't worry about inflation. It won't cause inflation. They said it over. It's not going to cause inflation if Biden passes these trillions and trillions of dollars of spending bills. Well, come on, like a seventh grader could tell you that if you're going to spend trillions of dollars, if you're going to print money, if you're going to borrow all this money, you're going to have inflation, right? Because inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. It's not a complicated concept. And yet these PhD economists, these Nobel Prize winning economists come out and say, well, Biden's policies won't cause inflation. And so, of course, you know the rest of this story, that less than 18 months later, the inflation rate goes from 1.5% when Trump left office to 9.1% under Biden. Whoops. They made a little goof there when they said there would be no inflation. And so, of course, they were completely discredited. And I've said, you know, by the way, I've been in this business for 40 years. I've made mistaken predictions. You know, none of us bat 1,000. And when I make a mistake, I admit that I was wrong. And I hate admitting when I'm wrong, but I will admit when I'm wrong, when I am wrong. And yet these economists never admitted they were wrong. They never retracted their statements, and they became a bit of a laughing stock. And then just this week, these same people come out and say, Biden's not going to cause inflation, Trump will. Well, there's on so many levels, this is wrong. One is that why didn't they just turn in their PhDs? Why didn't they just turn in their Nobel Prizes when they got it wrong the first time and just said, we don't know what we're talking about. Sorry, folks, we're out of business. Because that would be happening. You know, imagine if you had a stock picker who told you to pick all the wrong stocks, right? You would fire that person and you would pick another person to manage your money. Well, these people essentially picked all the wrong stocks, but they're still in the game because they have Nobel prizes. So they must be right. They must be smart. And so they come out with this ridiculous claim that it's going to be Trump that's going to cause inflation. Well, wait a minute. Let's just go back and review the evidence. As many of you know, I'm writing a book with my friend Arthur Laffer called The Trump Economic Miracle. So I've been going very carefully through this data on the economy. And it turns out that, as most of you know, the average inflation rate when Trump was president for 4 full years was about 2.1, 2.2%. So right smack near the Fed target of 2% targeted inflation. It's a good record. There wasn't any. In fact, when Trump left, there was 1.5%. Then Biden came in, and the average inflation rate under Joe Biden has been about 6.5%. So if my math is right, that's about 3 times higher rate of inflation under Biden than under Trump, because they both served a term. I mean, Biden not quite yet done with his term. Hopefully he will be out of office in 4 or 5 months, but it's been 3.5 years and he's had very high inflation. Inflation is now prices are about 21% higher than when he came into office. So why would you say, when you have one president who caused no inflation and the next inflation that caused raging inflation, that the president who's going to cause the inflation is the one who actually had no inflation? I mean, again, you can't make this stuff up. It's so crazy. Now, so, you know, these Nobel economists don't know what they're talking about. Maybe they've never gone to the grocery store. Maybe they've never been to the gas pump. Then we had this report that came out by this, I'm not even going to mention this. This was a left-wing organization that pretends that they care about balancing the budget. But of course, they're just a liberal think tank that supports everything, virtually everything Biden does. And so they come out with this report saying that the debt was twice as high under Trump than under Biden, twice as high. And so they said, you can't elect Trump because the budget deficit is going to go through the roof. Now, look, I'm the first one to acknowledge, even though I'm a Trump supporter, I'm a Trump, part-time Trump economic advisor, that Trump did not do a very great job of controlling spending. I mean, I admit that. And he did a lot of great things. He was a great president, in my opinion. We had an economic boom, but we spent too much money. And even if Donald Trump is president, I've told them this, you know, we spent too much money. But then Biden came in, and Biden took the deficits that were already too large and he massively increased them. He increased the national debt, folks, by $10 trillion, $10 trillion above the amount of debt that we were supposed to have if Biden had come into office. So how could any rational group argue that Trump's deficits are twice as high as Biden's? In fact, if you look at the numbers, the average deficit under Trump, and in this instance, I took out 2020 and 2021, a Trump year and a Biden year, because those were COVID years. Those were exceptional years that where, some outside factor like a pandemic caused big deficits. So taking out those 2 years, what we find is the average budget deficit under Trump was about $800 billion a year. That's very high. That's not a good record, Mr. President Trump. It was not a great record. But so $800 billion or so under Trump and $1.6 trillion under Biden. Now, if my math is right, $1.6 trillion is roughly twice as high as $800 billion. Maybe it's exactly twice as high. So how could any rational person, any thinking person, say that the deficits are going to be higher under Trump when they were twice as high under Biden? Again, this is the kind of thing that Donald Trump has to deal with. This is how they lie. They make up statistics all of the time that are not even remotely true. By the way, I use the word remotely because those economists who won the Nobel Prizes, they said there was no remote chance that there would be inflation if Biden put his program into place. A couple of other odds and ends I wanted to mention before we get to my first guest. This is a statistic that just blows me away. 6%. 6%. And you're probably wondering, what is 6%? 6% is, according to a new study, the percentage of federal workers that are working full time in the office today. 6%. That's 1 out of 16 federal workers have totally returned to the office in the wake of COVID, which ended 4 years ago or 3.5 years ago, and they're still not working full time. Did you miss them, by the way? Did you miss these people that aren't working? Maybe if they're not working and we didn't miss them, maybe we don't need them. Maybe when Trump comes into office, we can fire these people because they get paid much more than private sector workers, and they can only get those jobs because private sector workers pay taxes to support their jobs. So I say, let's start slashing federal employment, slashing the federal budget. I believe there are hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars that Donald Trump could save in the first few weeks of his presidency, because you have a president who wants to cut the budget, who wants to get rid of the fat, get rid of all these programs. I mean, my God, folks, we're spending still tens of billions of dollars on COVID. COVID's over. It's over. It ended. We're spending tens of billions of dollars on welfare programs. We don't even know where it went. There were hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID money that was stolen from taxpayers by fraudsters. Nobody chases it down. There's $300 billion of green energy programs that Biden won approval of that hasn't been spent yet. And I say, don't spend it, because you know what? It's not having any impact. There's no green energy movement in America today. The latest report just came out that last week, that last year, the world and the United States spent record amounts of money on fossil fuels. So there is no green energy transition. So if a program isn't working, stop doing it. Let's shut down the Department of Education. Just give the money to the parents. Let's get rid of the Department of Labor. What does that department do? Maybe they do some statistics. They can do that, but we don't need that. Do we need a Department of Energy? I don't think so. So we can save money. We can balance the budget. We can get this economy moving again. But it's going to take a new president, because Joe Biden has no inclination whatsoever. And he said this in the debate. He doesn't want to cut spending. He wants to raise taxes as if raising taxes is going to make America great again. And I'm here to tell you, folks, that is one of his biggest whopper lies of all. Okay, folks, this is the More Money Show. I'm glad to get that off of my chest. We'll be right back with the great Steve Forbes. So stay tuned.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WBC Talk Radio, the #1 radio station in these United States when it comes to free market and free enterprise ideas. And so for my first guest of the day, I'm just so proud to have my friend and one of the best financial and economic minds in these United States of America. Of course, I'm talking about Steve Forbes, who happens also to be a co-founder of Unleash Prosperity. Steve, thanks so much for joining.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
So much to talk about, Steve. I want to start, if I may. I don't know if you heard about this absurd report that came out by 15 or 16 Nobel Prize economists who say that if Donald Trump is elected, we're going to have runaway inflation. And the way to stop inflation is to elect Joe Biden. Now, these are guys who've been wrong in the past. It seems like it's a kind of a black eye to the Nobel Committee to choose these people. But what do you make of this?
Well, these are the same people, many of them, who said that Biden's plan to stop inflation several years ago was pure genius. They came out in public support
right.
of his plans. And we know that inflation went from 1.5% under Donald Trump to over 9% under Joe Biden, peaking. And we also know from Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary of Bill Clinton, that if you include interest payments, which people have to make, and as a cost of living, the height of inflation was 18% under Joe Biden.
Right.
It's around 7% today. And
right.
If the Nobel Prize was a stock, we'd be selling it short.
I think that's exactly right. These guys are bet 100. They've got a batting average 100 of 1,000. They always seem to get it wrong. I would have thought, Steve, they would have been embarrassed to put something like that out.
There's no shame today. They just go and do it and hope that nobody pays attention and doesn't bother to do fact checking. That's the way they operate. Whether it's the laptop,
yeah, it's so sad that economics has become so political. So, Steve, you and Art Laffer and Larry Kudlow taught me supply side economics, and one of the things that I learned from listening to you guys is that what really matters is, in terms of in controlling inflation, is obviously to keep the dollar stable in price, but also to increase the supply of goods and services, to increase production. And as Art Laffer would say, if the economy produces more apples, you're going to get lower prices. I don't understand why people on the left don't understand. It seems like it's a pretty basic principle that more production is going to lead to lower prices, but a lot of economists don't believe that.
Well, they don't operate in the real world and don't have to, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that it's amazing that we've been around. How many years have we had organized government? 3,000, 4,000 years?
Right. Right.
They still haven't learned to learn the truth about inflation. And what really is the bottom line on this is it's about control. When people have control of their resources, when we have free markets, which is people, markets are people, people do things without government bureaucratic permission. The liberals, the far left, doesn't like that. They want to be in charge. They want to control everything you do, business side and the personal side. So it's not about growing the economy. It's about control. They say it's about the economy, but if it was, they would notice that under Trump, guess what happened to lower income people? Their salaries went up at a faster pace than other brackets. So if you want to have people get ahead, Trump showed that there's a positive way to do it, and that is reduce tax rates and deregulate.
So that is Steve Forbes. He is the economist, financial extraordinaire. Again, Steve, for being on. So I wanted to cover a couple of other quick issues because you had some really interesting columns this week that really, I think, were dead center right. One of the things that Joe Biden has been talking a lot about is he's going to reduce drug prices, Steve Forbes, by imposing price controls on drugs. And price controls never work. They didn't work for Nixon. They didn't work for Ford or Carter. And yet here we are again talking about price controls. And these seems to me to be even more diabolical, because if you put price controls on drug manufacturers, we're going to slow down new drug innovation, won't we?
Yes. In terms of price control, just have them go online and look up Roman Empire, Diocletian, price controls, didn't work. The empire collapsed. And in terms of drugs, yes, just about prices we pay or production per se. This is about people's health and future health. The U.S. has been the great innovator in the world in terms of creating new drugs, new medical devices. And what Biden is proposing would kill that, which would hurt us and the rest of the world. This is really bad stuff.
It is. And, there was a study by an economist, Thomas Phillipson at University of Chicago, who's, one of the best price economists in the country. And he says you're going to have, maybe 20 to 30 to 40 fewer blockbuster drugs over the next 30 years. Steve, you're right that so many of the blockbuster drugs have come from the United States of America. And Thomas Phillipson, who is a professor at the University of Chicago, says that it could be 20 or 30 or 40 blockbuster drugs that would be delayed if these price controls are put into effect. And that would mean we're not going to win the race for the cure for cancer or heart disease or Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis. I mean, this is serious stuff.
It is indeed. And this gets to one of the things that makes it so hard to fight is that people don't miss what they don't see. Right. They won't know of these wonderful drugs, medications that we're not going to see. And we're all going to suffer for it. And we won't know the reason why. And so that's what makes it so invidious. They do it for short-term political gain, they think, but they end up blighting our future, which goes against the whole American dream, is making each generation the opportunity to be better off, financially and health, in terms of liberty, than the previous generation. And this administration is stepping on that, stomping on that in a deadly way.
So, Steve, you just in the last couple of minutes, I'm talking, of course, to Steve Forbes. You put out a great video every week, and I find that we oftentimes put your video in our Unleash Prosperity newsletter because it's always so fascinating. You pick the best subjects. Can you give us a sneak preview of what your next video will be about?
It's about the fact that, unfortunately, because of Biden's weak policies, we're going to have more foreign crises, including the possibility of a conflict in the Middle East expanding. And, of course, that will have a deleterious impact on the economy. And, again, weakness begets war. Weakness begets real bloody trouble. So this administration, whether it's dealing with foreign policy or with the domestic policy, has been a disaster, a stark contrast to Donald Trump. And I hope the voters keep that in mind. You have two records to compare. And I think Trump has made it clear he's wants to do more on the tax side. And if Biden gets ahead in terms of these tax increases, it'll be an unmitigated disaster. Republicans will be doing the country a favor in blocking those tax increases. So that's what we're discussing next is foreign policy, and we'll, of course, be doing more in the economy, and hopefully we'll be able to look forward to better days come November.
Well put, Steve, and you're so right. We've got, 3 wars going on right now. You've got prices still rising. And these tax increases. One last thing. He's talking about not just doubling the capital gains tax, but also taxing unrealized capital gains. I don't think that's ever been done before, Steve Forbes.
No, it hasn't. And it would be a disaster for investment. And without investment, you don't have a future. You stagnate. And it also destroys wealth. By taxing it, you destroy it. They don't realize these people don't have lots of cash sitting around in a money bin like Scrooge McDuck, the Disney character. It's about value. And when people see no future or the value of assets go down, and that's wealth destruction. Wealth is assets, not piles of cash and jewelry in your money bin.
That's Steve Forbes. Steve Forbes is my pick if Donald Trump wins, and I think he will. I think Steve Forbes should be the next Treasury Secretary of the United States. Boy, would that be awesome. Steve, thanks so much for joining. Have a great weekend. And folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WBC Talk Radio. This is your host, Steve Moore. And one of the things I think that makes our show a success and our show so informative is that we just have about the best guests possible. So my next guest is Jason Trennert, who is the CEO of Strategist, which does some of the best political and financial analysis in the country. I read their stuff all of the time. Jason, thanks for joining.
Steve, thanks for having me.
So I'd like to get your sense of how the markets are kind of pricing out a Trump versus a Biden presidency, because this is going to be a close election, and the betting odds still have it pretty close with Trump a slight leader. And I wonder, how will the markets react to one versus the other? And also, how is the stock market pricing in, let's say, the odds of a Trump presidency?
That's a great question. I think in a certain sense, particularly when it comes to AI, the good news is that I don't believe that the possibility of a Trump presidency is scaring the market at all. As a matter of fact, I think to the extent to which President Trump is likely to be a deregulator, it could be one of the reasons why the AI stocks have held up so well. And the reason why I say this, though, is that there's a lot of fear-mongering going on right now, as you know, among kind of the professional economist class that's trying to scare people about President Trump and what he might do to the market. And yet the market, as you know, is up about 15% year to date. So AI is probably the biggest. The reason why I bring up AI is that it's certainly the biggest driver of market returns so far this year. I think in other elements, I'm not so sure, particularly when it comes to financials. There's been a lot that would suggest that President Trump is necessarily going to win because those stocks haven't moved that much yet. But I would suspect that they would be the other big winners from a Trump presidency. Energy is another sector which I think it bears watching because it's probably the one that would have the biggest move, or certainly there would be the biggest change in policy. And here you're starting to see certain companies like Cheniere, symbol LNG, start to really move because I think people are starting to expect there to be more exports of liquefied natural gas, which would be terrific for the United States and good for certain parts of the energy industry as well. Yeah, well, when it comes to policy, I mean, there's a lot of issues that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are diametrically opposite on, but there's very few as much as energy policy, where basically Trump is all in, right, on producing as much oil and gas as possible. Although it's not clear if you have a president who's going to allow drill, baby, drill, then that's going to lower the price of oil and gas. And maybe the oil and gas companies don't make as much money. I mean, what do you think? Well, it's very, and that's why, Steve, I said, it would benefit certain energy companies, but you're absolutely right. In the early 80s, the two big deregulators of the energy industry were President Reagan in his first term and President Trump in his first term. And in both instances, the price of oil came down, but the stocks didn't do particularly well. Right. And that's because there's a tendency, particularly among energy companies, to punch holes in the ground, even when they're being the most disciplined. People who run energy companies, they're usually guys, they'd rather punch holes in the ground than send out dividend checks or do share repurchases or something. So, but the thing is, it's good for the country. It's great for consumers, and but it may not be terrifically good for shareholders. I remember in the mid-1980s when Reagan was president, we had pro-drilling policies and the oil and gas industry, had a collapse. Remember that in the mid-80s because the price came down so rapidly. But boy, was that good for American consumers and all other industries. Now, what would you say, Jason? I'm talking to Jason Trennert, who's the CEO of Strategist, one of the best financial advisory firms in the country. Tell me what
industry do you think would benefit the most from a Trump presidency, and which industry do you think would benefit the most from a Biden victory?
Well, the industry that would benefit the most from a Trump presidency, I think, would almost undoubtedly be financials.
Why?
And that's largely because President Trump has vowed to deregulate the financial services industry, which I think is long overdue. As you may know, we have 36% less publicly traded companies today than we had in 1997. And that is due in no small part to the fact that it is extremely costly to be public, and that prevents the average Americans from getting involved in some of the great companies that are out there. So you have private equity companies that are making a lot of profits, but the average guy who might not have access to that isn't being involved. So financials, in my opinion, would be the biggest beneficiary. From a Biden presidency, one would have to say it would probably be the renewable energy companies,
it's all subsidized.
So largely because of subsidies. The thing that is often missed in this, though, is that particularly when it comes to if you want to invest in artificial intelligence, that's going to require an enormous amount of electricity. Yep. And as you know, most of our electricity is driven by fossil fuels. 60% of our electricity is derived from the use of fossil fuels.
Yes.
So I don't see how you can do it. I don't see how President Biden could possibly invest in productivity while shunning fossil fuels at the same time.
So, two reactions to what you were just saying, Jason. First of all, on the issue of electricity, I've been saying that I think there's two. I'm not an investment expert at all, but I'm very, very bullish on two sectors of the economy. One is just electricity production. We're going to need a lot more electric power. We're going to need a lot more utilities providing that power, because if only because of AI, which uses 5 to 6 times more energy, I think, as you know, Jason, than the internet does. So I think we're going to need a lot more electric power, and I don't think we're ready for that. And the other one is data centers. We just don't have enough data centers in this country, and we're running out of space.
Listen, Steve, I couldn't agree with you more. And there's no question. Of course, no one quite knows who the ultimate biggest beneficiaries from artificial intelligence will be. Having said that, there's also no doubt whatsoever, if you look at the quarterly earnings reports, that the biggest technology companies in the world are investing in AI like there's no tomorrow. And that's why NVIDIA was briefly the largest company in the world 2 weeks ago, right? Yep. So it's happening. And as you mentioned, an AI search, I've heard it somewhere between 5 and 25 times, depending on the search, the amount of electricity needed just to do a Google search.
Yeah.
So and again, if you
now, on the green energy thing, I have a kind of theory, and I just want to run it by you, Jason, which is, you look at what's happening with the green energy industry right now, and you look at the batteries and the electric vehicles, and the industry is not doing well. And I've really come to the conclusion, Jason, and you may or may not agree with me on this, that the worst thing that ever happened to electric vehicles was Joe Biden, because the industry was booming when Biden came in, and then all of a sudden he started subsidizing it and throwing money at it, and giving all this money to people to buy the cars, and it became so political that half the country didn't want to buy them because they were kind of Biden cars. So maybe the EV industry might be better without Joe Biden.
Well, listen, if you believe, as I believe, as I know you do, that free markets are better allocators of capital than small groups of people, particularly small groups of unelected people at these agencies, I do think the future of electric vehicles would be brighter without the heavy hand of government forcing people to buy them, or essentially giving away subsidies to extremely wealthy people that don't need them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the big three, or big two plus in the United States, felt very strongly that they had to play ball with the Biden administration if they had any chance of competing. And so the only company I can think of that didn't buy into the siren song of electric vehicles is Toyota, but most other companies, because they're very dependent upon government, had to invest in this technology where they were very unsure of what the final demand would be. And what people are finding now, as you know, is, first of all, not only are electric vehicles one of the most, I would argue, ecologically dangerous products ever made. They're driven. They're completely constructed by a number of extractive materials. So they don't use oil, but they use copper, manganese, graphite, magnesium, cobalt, everything you can think of.
All made in China.
Exactly. All mined from the earth. So it's hardly a green. It's only green at the tailpipe, but it's not a particularly green product in any way. But people are finding that they're not particularly reliable if you're just a regular guy that has to get to work every day, especially if it's less than 50 degrees.
Jason, on the way out, this is Jason Trennert from Strategis, one of the top political consulting and financial consulting firms in the country. So you do a lot of politics and finances, and so and you kind of do where the politics and Wall Street intersect. And so I always have been told, and I wonder if you agree or disagree with this, and you think it would hold up after 2024 election, that the market likes balanced control. In other words, they don't want one party control of everything. And I've heard, and you correct me if I'm wrong about this, that that the market does better or best when you have split control rather than one party or the other controlling all the levers of government. What do you have to say about that?
I think that has historically been true, but I'm very skeptical that would be true next year if Joe Biden were to win and he were to have control of Congress, because the first thing that would happen would be the expiration, among the first things that would happen, the expiration of the Trump tax cuts, which would wind up being, in essence, the largest tax increase in history. I think we have to get back to just first principles.
So what happens, Jason,
market-based economies?
Right. What happens if Trump runs the table and Republicans have the trifecta? What if they have the House, the Senate, and Trump is in the White House? What happens to the market?
Personally, I think it's over the longer term, I think it's very positive, mainly because we won't continue to hurt ourselves by not taking advantage of our own natural resources. As one example, we won't be self-flagellating ourselves in terms of regulations of our financial industry. We'll be doing a lot of things that allow the markets to allocate capital, as opposed to having small groups of PhDs in government agencies make those decisions for the rest of us. So I feel very, very strongly that while that may have been true in the past, I would also say that the policies, particularly on the Democratic side, have never been this radical in the past. And so we need to get back to center, where again the government is not the main player in the overall economy. You're letting private enterprise make these decisions, so you have the collective wisdom of billions of people on Earth allocating capital.
Yeah. Well, these are great points. Jason Trennert from Strategis, thanks so much for joining and imparting so much wisdom on us. I am, of course, hoping that we do get that Republican sweep, and I hope that you're right, that it's good for workers and investors and all Americans. Folks, I will be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. I hope you will stay tuned for our second hour. But before we break, I just want to mention one quick other statistic, rather Biden outrage, since we've been talking about that all day today. The Congressional Budget Office says that the total price tag, you ready for this, for Joe Biden's student loan bailouts, $400 billion. $400 billion is how much Joe Biden is taking from our bankrupt federal government and sending to deadbeats who will not pay their student loan. I've said it before. I'll say it again. First of all, if you take out a loan, you should pay it back, not the taxpayer. Second of all, if people cannot pay back their student loans, it should not be the taxpayer who should pay for it. It should be these big, fat, flabby universities with $100 billion of money stuffed in their endowments. Why don't they spend that money on paying down the student debt? Why should average taxpayers like you and me have to pay for this? It's an outrage, and it should not continue. And I guarantee you, when Donald Trump is elected, which I think he will be, that fraudulent program will be ended, and it'll no longer be on the backs of people like you and me to pay people's student loans when they should pay back their loans themselves. We'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Hey, it's Ryan Payne and Bob Payne from Payne Capital Management. Of course, that's Payne. This week and every week on the More Money Show, talking about the economy, the stock market, retirement, your money. And man, oh man, Bob, like every week, there's a lot going on the Street of Dreams. And Friday kind of capped off with seeing that preferred measure of inflation for the PED, the PCE number, coming in at 2.6%, which says to us inflation is continuing to moderate. Is that good or bad, Bob, or indifferent? Read the tea leaves for us.
I think it's really good, Rod. We need inflation to moderate. It would be really good if prices actually started to go down, because the cost of everything is through the roof. And, I think we talk about moderating inflation every week. We're not talking about prices coming down. We're talking about the price increases going up a lot slower than they have over the last 3 years.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because the one thing we know about companies are when they raise their prices, they don't really lower the prices ever again, Bob. So you have permanently higher prices. And I think that's what the American people are feeling right now. We talk about this a lot, but just the fact that you have food costs up over wages over the course of the last couple of years. We know energy costs have come up a lot. We know shelter costs have come up a lot. Healthcare insurance costs go up a lot. So a lot of the main things that we spend on right now are at extremely high levels versus what people are making.
Yeah, and that's a problem, right? Because, you think, all right, well, their cost of doing business isn't going up right now. I mean, during COVID, we had the supply chain issues and price of everything went up. But, corn's going down in price right now, soybeans, everything but oil in the commodities area is going down, which means these companies are making more money. Their profit margins are going up. Now, as an investor, I'm happy about that. And I think, you can sit there and listen and get mad, but I say get even, get invested, take advantage of this. If their profit margin is going to be up, stock price is going to be up, and you have to overcome inflation, you can't do it by screaming at the TV screen, right?
No, you can't. And, if you're preparing for retirement or retired now, we've talked about this too a lot, is like, don't wait on it. You've got to take advantage of the opportunity now while you have it, especially because if inflation continues to come down, and if it is, that means the Fed most likely is going to cut interest rates sooner than later. And we know your money market fund's at risk because that 5% can go away like that. Meanwhile, you're at a 15-year high in interest rates. It's a good time to lock into some longer-term bonds. If you own tax-free bonds right now, they're getting 3 to 4%. And if you're in a high tax bracket living in places like New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, that's like getting close to 6% on your money without a lot of risk. So I think there's a lot of opportunity being missed right now, especially if you're planning for retirement.
Yeah, it's like going out in a snowstorm, right, with that blanket. You got it all wrapped around you. You feel nice and comfortable and warm. But I'll tell you what, the winds are howling. And as soon as these short-term rates start to drop, that comfort's going to go away, and you're going to miss the opportunity to lock in these rates, to have, good yield, a good appreciation, to overcome inflation, because the biggest risk to everybody's financial plan right now, today, and always will be, is inflation. Because inflation's real, it's hidden, it's insidious. I despise it, but I got to do something about it. I got to be invested to overcome it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one you have to solve for. It's one of the bigger variables you have to solve for. It's not just the fact you need maybe current income, but is that income you're receiving, is it adjusting with inflation? And I would argue for most of us, it's probably not. And we know the stats on this, right? Every 20 years, your cost of living is going to double. And that's pretty daunting, because if you're in your 50s or 60s right now, and you live a normal lifespan, that means if you need $10,000 a month, well, you're going to need $20,000 in the future. So just having a static income plan doesn't cut it. And right now, more than ever, you have to be thinking about that.
Well, that's the problem with getting older, right? You know, time marches on and markets operate. And you know what? The markets don't care what we think. They don't care how you feel. So just keep that in mind, right? Time passes, market operates, and the only way to take advantage of it is to be invested. And that's the time to do it is right now.
It is because, look, if you look at the economic data, and again, we get that it doesn't feel great right now. We know people are really feeling the crunch when it comes to inflation. But bottom line is inflation is starting to moderate. Still going up, but at a slower rate than it was before. And if you look at the labor market, it's probably not falling off a cliff anytime soon, right? If profit margins are going up, that means companies are most likely going to be hiring. We know we have a labor shortage. And as long as purchasing power continues to increase, and it is starting to increase, that probably bodes well for the economy and the stock market moving forward. So that's why you don't want to wait here, waiting for this like hard landing that a lot of economists have called for. It's probably not likely.
No, not at all. And I think, the price of oil has been going up because, look, there's always risks out there. You got geopolitical risks. There's a war going on in Ukraine. Look what's happening in the Middle East. You have all types of uncertainty, but there's always uncertainty, right? But they're not, it's not certain. So you can sit there and worry. But, if things start to settle down and the price of oil comes down, Rye, man, we're going to be off to the races, right? You have oil dropping and interest rates dropping, and you have $6 trillion sitting in a money market fund. All of a sudden, you're going to have all this money rushing in at the drain at the same time. It's kind of like yelling fire in the theater. You don't want to be the last one getting to that exit.
Well, it's like the old Wayne Gretzky quote, right? You want to skate to where the puck is going to be. And I think that's the mistake we make. We look at where things are today and we extrapolate that out as a projecting out in the future. And to your point, Bob, like realistically, the Fed now, it's a 60% chance they will cut by the fall. And that's not that far away. So I think the reinvestment risk that we see right now, we probably look at more portfolios a month than any other firm out there. So we see that most of you are sitting with higher levels of cash than you probably should be, right? And cash is not a way to solve your long-term income problems because the rates you're getting right now are temporary. But guess what? Your expenses in retirement, they're not temporary. If anything, they're going up. So you've got to play the long game, not the short game here. And I think that's one of the bigger mistakes that we see right now.
Well, as you always say, Rye, history doesn't always repeat, but it often rhymes. We're going through another technological innovation. Now it's called artificial intelligence, right? We went through the internet phase, 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And, look at hindsight. Who didn't, if you look back on hindsight and say, what company didn't benefit from the internet? What company didn't become, a .com company? Everybody, every company, every part of the industry, every part of the economy benefited from this new technology. Same thing's happening right now. You don't have to be in the one internet stock or the one AI stock to benefit. All companies are going to benefit. So you're going to have that innovation. It's going to increase, profit margins. When's it going to happen? I don't know. It's going to be tomorrow, 2 weeks from now, 2 years from now. But the trend is your friend. You've got to be invested to take advantage of it. And you don't need to be in a risky stock. You have to just be invested in the market.
Yeah. And right now, if you position your portfolio correctly, you can generate the type of income you need for retirement, factoring in inflation. And if you're thinking to yourself right now, like, I do need that income plan for retirement. I get it, Bob and Ryan, every week you pound the table. The world doesn't end very often. Well, it doesn't. And if you're one of our next 10 callers, we keep 10 slots open for the whole show. If you saved over $1 million for your retirement, Bob and I will run for you our total financial master plan, and we'll do that with no obligation or cost. It's a full holistic review. We literally look at everything. There's not a firm out there that will do this work up front. We go as far as building you your own personalized financial portal. We'll give you a bird's eye view of your entire financial life and just hone in on every financial issue you need to address today, whether it's that income plan for retirement, how to take Social Security, how to draw from your portfolio, a dynamic income plan so you don't run out of money. We're going to look at diversification. Market's been extremely volatile, extremely uncertain. Has your portfolio been up and down like a yo-yo? Or have you been sitting in cash, paralysis by analysis? You can't figure out what to do. We're going to give you a full investment game plan tied to your goals, show you how to grow your wealth, but most importantly, protect it over the rest of your life. And we'll look at fees and taxes. Wall Street loves to sell you those annuities insurance products, brokerage products, mutual funds. We'll do a deep dive of every investment you own, show you how to reduce the cost and optimize your portfolio for taxes. Not what you make, it's what you take. You'll get our full tax playbook. We've got 10 slots if you saved over $1 million for your retirement. You call or text right now.
All you have to do is text or call 844-752-6692. That's 844-752-6692, or just simply call 844-PLAN-NYC. That's 844-PLAN-NYC. If you're one of our next 10 callers, you've saved over $1 million for your retirement. Our team of financial advisors and certified financial planners will help you to create your own unique total financial master plan. Now, there's no obligation. There's no strings attached. But if you're not one of our next 10 callers, you're going to miss out. So text or call right now, 844-752-6692. That's 844-752-6692. Or just simply pick up the phone and call 844-PLAN-NYC. That's 844-PLAN-NYC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. This is our second hour because we now run for 2 hours on the More Money Show, and it is a great privilege to have you. I hope you'll stay tuned. This full hour, we have some great guests coming up, including Sean Spicer, who was the you all remember Sean Spicer. He was the first press secretary for Donald Trump, has some great stories to tell. He has a new film out, and you definitely want to hear Sean's story. But I want to, this is the last show that we'll be doing before the 4th of July. So I wanted to say something about this important holiday, this birthday of the United States, because those of you who are regular listeners to this show know that I consider myself a patriotic American. I am one who believes my two favorite holidays, by the way, are Thanksgiving and the 4th of July. I love those holidays because we celebrate our great country. And the reason I bring this up, what I want to talk to you about for a few minutes in the open of this show is we need a new patriotism in this country. We really do. We need to make sure that our young people are understanding the greatness of this country, understanding the history of our country. We have many stains in our history. We are human beings. We are not perfect people, but we are the last best hope for humanity. And so we think about this. Most of you listening to this show were born in the United States. Many of you were not. And if you're an immigrant, we love having you here. If you're a productive citizen, if you're here legally and you've got a job and you're providing for your family, that's what America is all about. But it breaks my heart when I see what these kids are learning and not learning in our schools. There was the big hullabaloo about whether, I forget what state that was. I think it might have been Oklahoma, but don't quote me on that, wanted to put up the 10 Commandments in the classrooms. And, oh my God, we can't do that. Blah, blah, blah. We can have all these liberal things, but we cannot put the 10 Commandments. And I'm not going to get into a fight about whether that is a separation of church and state. But how about putting the Constitution in every classroom in America? How about that? How about we put the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution in every single classroom from first grade through in college? They should put it in college too. I bet you most kids, students in high school and college, they don't even know what the Bill of Rights is. They don't know. They probably can't mention what the First Amendment is, the right of free speech, the right of assembly, the right of religion, all of these basic rights that are fundamental to being an American. They don't know about the right to bear arms. They don't know about the fact that the 9th and 10th Amendments talk about the importance of power residing with the states and the people. The Constitution really is a rule book about what the government can do, and it is a safeguard of our freedoms. We are a great country. It is a great time to celebrate our country. And here's what makes me nervous. Young people are not patriotic. Now, look, I know there are a lot of exceptions to this, but the studies show that many young Americans don't believe that America is a special place on this planet. And it's because they've been indoctrinated with anti-America rhetoric from the teachers' unions and the people who run the schools, the media, social media is blasting America as if we're the problem for all the troubles in the world. When we're not the problem, we are the solution and the salvation. And so I hope everyone will take a special case this next few days, if you have young kids, to make sure that they do appreciate how lucky they are. Because what I was saying earlier is that, I think the population of the planet is somewhere around 7 billion people now. I should know exactly, but it's around that. And the population of the United States is 350 million people. So that means we had a 1 in 20 chance of being in this country. And if you're born here, you won the lottery of life, folks, because you were born in the best possible place to become an adult. And that makes you privileged, and that makes, privileged in a good sense. And so I want to make sure that all of us celebrate this country. And if you want to help make America great again, which we all want to do, please teach your kids about the history of this country. And it's a marvelous story. Nobody is telling it. And yes, we've had problems in the past. But one last thing, when I was out at the Reagan Library, I met a number of people who had just come from some of the celebrations of the D-Day. And these are, there are still people who are alive who fought in D-Day. Some of them are nearly 100 years old. And here's the thing. I'll bet you that if you just go to an average teenager and ask them what D-Day was, they won't know. They won't know because it's not being taught. These incredible heroes who saved us, people are not appreciative of what they did because they don't know what they did, because they haven't been taught it. So I want Donald Trump, and I've made a big case to him, that when he becomes president again, that we have an emphasis in our schooling that we teach American history again the way it should be taught. And that is not to say that we are the problem in the world, but we are, as Ronald Reagan put it, that we were put here as a divine providence, as a freedom, as a beacon of freedom for the rest of the world, a shining city on a hill. Okay, folks, I wanted to get that off my back, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do it. We'll be right back with my next guest.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio, the number one talk radio station in these United States. And I am very pleased to introduce to you all Scott Bessent, who is the founder and CEO of Key Square Capital, and has also become a close advisor to Donald J. Trump, and has spent a lot of time with him at Mar-a-Lago and been crisscrossing around the country, spreading the message of hope and growth and free markets. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining the More Money Show.
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to be on with you.
Okay, let's get right down to it. Let's talk about your favorite Treasury Secretary, and I'm talking about Janet Yellen. And tell us about what there was a bit of a scandal this week with her and her. What is she saying about inflation? Of course, she's been the Treasury Secretary who, during the time when the inflation rate went up to 9.1%, the highest inflation rate in 40 years, and she's presided over about a 20% increase in prices. So what is she saying about inflation?
Well, Steve, two days ago, when she was asked about food inflation, and someone said, do you go to the grocery store? She says, yes, I go every week, but I haven't noticed much of a change in prices. It was a complete out of touch remark for someone. I think her government disclosure form shows she's worth $20 million. So maybe she's a champagne socialist, and champagne hasn't gone up much. But
I guess when you're really rich like that and the price goes up for bread or eggs or ice cream, and it goes up by another $1, it really doesn't matter to you very much. And in fact, this has been one of my pet peeves, actually, Scott, is that so many rich elite liberals don't feel like inflation is a problem, because for them, it really isn't a problem because they have so much money. Whereas working class people, and these are generally the Trump voters, they're the ones who are really being financially stressed out. By the way, Scott, even when you go to McDonald's, I bet Janet Yellen probably hasn't been to McDonald's in 25 years, but you got to take a family of 4 to McDonald's, you're paying $65, $70.
Yeah. And look, Steve, I think, she's obviously out of touch, and the Biden spin machine, it's projection and deflection when they say that Donald Trump and the Republicans are the party of the rich. The top 20% have never done so well as they're doing under Joe Biden. In the Biden economy, you either own assets, you own equities, you own your home, and you're doing great. And the bottom 50% who own 1% of all the equities, they do not own their homes, are getting crushed. So like in Joe Biden's America, you either have assets or you have debt. And, like the perfect indicator of the disparity is there was a survey that showed that for upper end Americans, the plans to take a European vacation have never been higher. The same week that came out, the Philadelphia Fed released their credit card data that they've been measuring since 2012, and it showed the 3.5% delinquencies, which is the highest since we've had the measurement set. So, again, they're just out of touch. And, one thing that, I heard a few months ago, and I went and, unlike Secretary Yellen, I went in and investigated myself, was I was very disturbed to hear that food bank usage is at an all-time high. And that's not supposed to be happening at 3.9% unemployment. So I went and investigated it for myself. I went into 2 food banks, and I asked the folks, the good folks who work there, what's happening. And they said people are not getting, they can't fill their grocery carts anymore with their earnings. So what they do is they buy more fresh things, milk, vegetables, all that at the grocery store. And then they have to go to a food bank to top off with canned goods. And
by the way, Scott, it's for
a family, for a parent to cross the threshold of a food bank, people want dignity. And like under Donald Trump, there was abundance, and inflation was very low. You just said, inflation was 9.1% at one point, in a month under Biden. Yeah. That's 3 years under Donald Trump.
I know. And by the way, it's interesting, Scott, because I'm not rich. I mean, I'm in maybe the top 20% of income, and we do fine. We have a nice lifestyle, my wife and I, and our 2 kids. But I make the money, and my wife Ann, she kind of manages the money, and she's the one who does the shopping, and she's the one who pays the bills. And she finally got so frustrated with me, and she said, I've got to just show you what things cost, because I'm kind of like Janet Yellen. I don't go to the grocery store, and I don't know what things cost. And so we just spent the weekend, and I went shopping with her, and I was just astounded at, $8 for ice cream and that kind of thing. And then here's the really interesting thing, and again, I'm not middle class, I'm upper middle class. And yet we now feel like when we take into account inflation and then taxes, that the government now takes, Scott, 50% of my money. 50%.
Yep. Yeah. No. Look, it is. So, Steve, let me take a step back and tell you about what I've observed over the past few months. As you mentioned, I've come out from behind my desk. I had a very good business, good life, good family at my investment firm, because I am so alarmed by what's happening with the Biden administration. Mm-hmm. And I think you would likely agree with me that this is 2024, 25, 26 is the last chance for a supply side solution because they just keep layering on more and more debt. And Lael Brainerd gave this speech, and I call it the ventilator speech, is, well, we just let the patient get in such bad shape. Right. We got to put them on a ventilator because only higher taxes will save us. And I disagree with that. I agree that there is ample opportunity if we can get a hold of this thing in 25 to have a supply side solution to, but a careful reading of the Biden spin machine 6 months ago, 9 months ago, we were hearing how great Bidenomics is, and that fell flat.
Right.
So then it turned into, people like kind of this sophistry from Alan Blinder, Paul Krugman, Greg Ip. All of you, you peasants don't understand how good you had it.
Right.
Like, the numbers the numbers are great. What are you talking about? You should be grateful. This term vibe session that people really don't understand, and like the American people do understand. They know it. Like when you go to the grocery store with your wife, when people have to go into a food bank for the first time, they know what's happening. And now, so the vibe session, that narrative has fallen on its face. So now, Steve, and we'll get to my article this morning. The new bit is, well, a Trump 2.0 will be very inflationary and bad for the economy, because they can't argue the facts on Trump 1.0 because Trump 1.0 was one of the best.
There was no inflation. Yeah.
Well, there was no inflation. It was one of the strongest economies in 100 years.
Yes.
And everybody did great. Lower income, middle income, upper income, the stock market, low inflation. That did great. So, the new talking point, and, it's a headline in the New York Times. It's these 16 high IQ morons who published yesterday, saying, oh, well, be afraid of Donald Trump 2.0. And, any evidence-based analysis belies that. Donald Trump's not going to be inflationary. He's going to cut government spending and get the deficit under control. He's going to exercise energy dominance, and he's going to deregulate. Those are all disinflationary.
Well, it's so interesting because I had Steve Forbes on earlier on the show, Scott, and he was making many of these points, and that means you're both right. And I asked him this question, and maybe I'll ask it to you too, because I'm just mystified by it. You and I, and Scott, and obviously Steve Forbes and Art Laffer and Larry Kudlow, we do believe in the supply side of the economy. That's why they call us supply side economists, which means that we want to increase the productive capacity of our economy. And that's a good way to reduce prices. As Art Laffer would say, you produce more apples, you're going to get a lower price of apples. And it's almost like their antenna, people on the left, their antenna doesn't receive this message. They don't understand the supply. Maybe it's because they've never been in business. Maybe they don't understand how the real world works. Maybe they're in their ivory towers at Harvard and Yale and Princeton. And by the way, they're doing very well, right? They're doing wonderfully. And as you said, they don't get down with the masses and the peasants to see how things are really going. But my point is, you talked about deregulation. You talked about producing more energy. You talked about the Trump tax cuts. Those are all supposed to increase the supply of goods and services. And by the way, that's what happened when Trump cut taxes. We did have an increase of supply. We had an increase in output and the economy boomed. And now these same people who said it wouldn't work the first time, and it did, now they're saying it's going to cause inflation. I don't know. I mean, how could you make such a stupid statement?
Well, Steve, let's go back in history. A huge group, they wrote the same kind of letter about Margaret Thatcher. It's a danger. I think when I was a freshman in college, there might have been 700 of them who said it about Ronald Reagan.
Right.
Then, for Trump 1.0, there were 370 economists, eight of them Nobel Prize winners. they couldn't have been further off the mark.
Yep.
And then 13 of these 16 geniuses, they said that the Biden spending would not lead to inflation.
Yeah.
And guess what? We got the worst inflation in 40 years.
Yeah.
Look, if I'd seen Art Laffer's signature on this, I would have been worried. I had the privilege. I was in Nashville yesterday, and I got to spend all afternoon and dinner with Dr. Laffer, and we were just laughing at this. And and this is clearly, it's just a political hit job. I wouldn't be surprised if Biden doesn't bring it up at the debate tonight. Nancy Pelosi was just on TV saying, 16 Nobel Prize winners said Donald Trump's going to ruin the economy. And, it reminds me of the Hunter Biden laptop when 51 intelligence, quotation marks, intelligence officials said that it had all the hallmarks of Russian-style disinformation. Well, you know what I would say to these 16 economists? They have all the hallmarks of Soviet-style economics.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think they are so – I mean, it's a sad commentary that the economics profession has become so political. But incidentally, you were talking about the history of this. In the early 1980s, when Reagan was running for president in 1980, all of these genius economists said, "Oh, Reagan's policies are going to cause inflation." That's what they said. If he cuts those tax rates, we're going to have inflation. And what happened under Reagan? We had the biggest reduction in inflation in 50 years. I mean, the inflation rate went from 11% to 4%. So, but they don't even learn from history, Scott. This is, by the way, Scott Bessent, who is the CEO of Keysquare advisory firm. And by the way, he is on the short list, folks, to be in the cabinet for Trump. And I wouldn't be surprised if you weren't the next Treasury Secretary. But they never learn. They just don't learn.
Well, Steve, they don't learn because I study economic history too, and all this goes back to Janet Yellen's mentor was James Tobin. At Yale, when I was there.
He won a Nobel Prize. Yep.
He won a Nobel Prize, and Professor Tobin advised President Kennedy, and President Kennedy, was afraid of him causing inflation from spending too much. But the Tobin plan set off the inflation of the 60s that continued into the 70s. So this is just coming full circle from James Tobin to Janet Yellen. And the person one of the professors who signed both letters is Janet Yellen's husband, George Akerlof, who I am told used to wear a Mao jacket when he was at CEA in the White House. So. Yeah.
Well, look what they've done. Look what they've done to the economy here. And, look, I think if Trump wins, and I know you agree with me because you have been one of Trump's strongest supporters. How long, Scott, on the way out, we've only got a minute and a half left. How long do you think it'll take for Trump to turn this battleship around?
Well, I think it could be pretty quickly. The real danger here, we are at a 7% budget deficit, which we've never seen during peacetime.
You mean 7% of GDP?
7% of GDP.
Yeah.
We normally have those during a war or a recession, and the first order of business is going to be passing hopefully making permanent, but at least extending the Trump 2017 tax plan, and we've got to get that done. But I think, I'm a academic and a market person, and the market side of me says that, everything you and I have talked about, slaying inflation, energy dominance, cutting regulation, that the market will realize that this is disinflationary, and, we could go into a virtuous cycle. The Fed could actually start cutting rates for the right reason, not the political reason.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right. And we could see a big boom. I mean, let's face it, we had a big boom in Trump's first 3 years in office until COVID hit. And we could return to that era of prosperity, and that would bring a smile to everyone's face. And we'll see how this all turns out. Scott Bessent, thanks so much for joining. This is the More Money Show on WABC. I'm Steve Moore, and we'll be right back.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC Talk Radio. I am so pleased to announce my next guest, Sean Spicer. Everyone knows Sean. He served so ably as a spokesman for Donald J. Trump, and that probably wasn't a very easy job, and you did a masterful job of it, Sean. And he is he has a new film out that I want to talk about called Trump's Front Row. But before we get into that, Sean, I've always said, as someone who's greatly admired Trump, that there's kind of a good Trump and a bad Trump. And but it strikes me that, for the last, 9 months or so, he's been so on his game. He's been I watched him when he went to I was with him when he went to the business roundtable meeting with those 75 CEOs. And he was just masterful the way he handled that. He was calm, he was cool, he's collected, he was factual, and the CEOs just ate it up. So what I'm saying to you is I think we've seen the good Trump lately, and I really believe if he can stay on this course, I think he's going to be the next president.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Remember the end of the 2016 campaign. Was it 4 or 5 weeks? He was just on his game. And it's sort of like when you have a big enough lead going into the fourth quarter of a game, at some point it just becomes insurmountable for your opponent, no matter how well they try to come on. And I think you're right. We're not now in the last 4 weeks. This is it, man. He's 4 months early this time. And at some point it's just going to become impossible for Joe Biden to ever catch up. So I think you're absolutely right. When he's on his game, there's no one better. And I think as long as he is in the mood where he's not taking the bait from people, he's talking about issues that matter. You're right. He's on cruise control, but he's got to stay that way. And I agree with you. And the last thing I would just say from a political standpoint, Steve, is we got to remember who matters, right? So every time that he says something that doubles down on the base, it's just reinforcing someone that's already with you. It's like a customer that's already bought the product. They don't count. They've already bought the product. You need the new sale. And right now, where we've got to go is to these double haters and the few people who are undecided. Those are what's going to put us over the difference in the battleground states.
So one of the things I admired so much about you was when you were the press secretary for the president and you had to go in front of a pretty hostile press out there, Sean, and you did such a great job. But what was that like? I mean, it felt like you were going into the lion's den every day.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the kind words. There's no question. I laugh every once in a while when I watch Corinne Jean-Pierre walk out right now, when you know that no matter what you say, they're not going to hold you accountable. They'll agree with you. They'll smile. And for me, there were days in which I could do no right. I've been honest and open about this, Steve. There are a couple of days where I fell short. I made a mistake, and I've tried to own that. But there are other days where it didn't matter. I mean, I could say, 2 + 2 is 4. And they'd say, except in cases where there's an additional. And so I think that they wanted to openly be hostile. But part of it was that they sensed an environment where if they made an outrageous comment or claim, they'd be rewarded. And the example that I always tell people is, think about this. There's a guy named Brian Karem. He is the Playboy correspondent in the White House. Now, that in itself is just a reminder for everyone who's always said that it is about the articles. Then now you can say, well, they have a White House correspondent. When I left and Sarah was doing the briefing, he attacked Sarah in a briefing, and it went viral, and he got a contract with CNN. Now, he didn't get a contract because he was great, well-sourced, or he had some amazing insight in his journalism. He got a contract because he made an ass of himself in the briefing room. And I think that's what a lot of journalists recognized during my tenure, which is the more absurd that you act, the more outrageous you create something, a scene, you'll be rewarded financially and professionally.
So, I've been in politics a long time. You have too. And, I go back to the early mid-Reagan years, and it used to not be like that. It used to be not so vicious. That there's always been a left-wing bias in the media for the last 50 years, but nothing like this where they, I attended some of those press conferences that you did and also some of them that Trump did. And I could tell just looking at these people, especially when Trump was talking to the press. I mean, they were just dripping with contempt and hatred for this man. And I thought, my God, this guy's the president of the United States. And he did a great job of handling the press. I don't know how he did it. Every single question was adversarial. But how does he do it? I mean, a lesser man would just wilt under that kind of pressure.
Yeah, and I think that I'm with you. Like I'm an Irish leprechaun that gets really angry sometimes. I mean, so he lets a lot roll off the shoulder. Everyone sort of remarks about how much he punches back, but he also lets a lot roll off his shoulders. But let's get back to the point here, which is, again, two things. One is they recognized that there was a professional reward and a financial reward because these contracts come with money when it came to attacking him. Secondly, I think one of the things that I try to point out about Trump, and this is that if you go back in history, all these former presidents played the game with the press. They sort of, hey, well, I'll be your buddy. I'll take you.
Yeah, right.
And Trump didn't do that with lobbyists in the media. And therefore, they created this adversarial, role with him because they said, if you're not going to scratch our back, then we're going to show you what we can do back to you.
Right. But do you think that was a mistake that he made?
No. I don't think because I think that
In other words, should he have kissed up to the media?
No. In fact, I think this is why. Look, you don't want the media. I want the people, and I think he wants the people. Right. And so I get it. The easy way out for a lot of politicians, and we see this with a lot of Republicans. I have a big problem with all these guys who suck up to the media to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner or to the galas and the events that they host because they want to be their friends, and they think if I say the right things enough that they'll like me. Trump's view was, I don't care. I'm not here for you. I'm here, and that's why I think that people like him more and more is that he's not trying to suck up to the Washington establishment.
I completely agree with that. And I love what you just said. I mean, he doesn't care. He doesn't care what these people think of him. He does care what average, ordinary Americans who work hard and do their job and great Americans, he cares about them, but I don't think he cares about these elite jerks that are in the press. And he's not out there to impress them, right?
No, and that's why, look, I think one of the things that people got tired with all politicians on both sides was talking point tested stuff, people who said one thing and did another. And the reality is you don't even have to like everything Trump did policy wise. Right. But the reality is that you knew he was going to shake up the system and he wasn't going to give you the same poll tested crap that everyone else did. And the thing that I think a lot of people liked is that, a lot of folks would do a CNN town hall and suck up to the moderator and try to be friends. You saw that one that he did with Caitlin Collins. He wiped the floor with them. The audience was on his side. The viewers were on his side because he didn't sit back and take the bait. I think people like that. They want change. They don't want scripted politicians. And I think too many people on the Republican side think that somehow they're going to be friends with these people or that they will like them. And they will use you. They will wrench you. But at the end of the day, they will never like you.
So, in the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, I had been hired by CNN to be their one conservative pro-Trump, commentator. And I have to tell you, I mean, it was vicious, and I was always 5 against 1 or 6 against 1. And I tried to hold my own. But one of the things that happened to me, and I just would like your reaction to this. I'm talking, of course, to Sean Spicer, who was the first press secretary for Donald Trump and is still very involved with the president. But as you may or may not know, I was nominated to be on the Federal Reserve Board. And, I have skeletons in my closet. And, from the moment it was announced, the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the Guardian and they had all these reporters going into every aspect of my life. And, so to make a long story short, all these things were coming out about me. I hate women. I hate blacks. I hate this group. I hate that group. Blah, blah, blah. I cheated on my 6th grade math test, that kind of thing. And I kept calling the president and saying, well, maybe I should, get out of this. I don't want to embarrass you, sir. And he kept saying, no, keep fighting, because he's just a fighter. And I love that about him.
Yeah, well, it's not just you. And I mean, he nominates good people, qualified people, of which you were. And I think, just as a side note, the reason they attacked you, in my opinion, is because they realized that you were a threat to the establishment, that you were not going to just
of course.
But think about this. Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, all these other people, he stuck with them. And I guarantee you, I kept waiting for him to drop people. Look, Steve, when I went to resign, I walked in the Oval Office. We knew we needed change. We were interviewing people. I was dual-hatted. I was the comms director and the press secretary. He wanted to bring in Anthony Scaramucci. I didn't agree with the move. And,
that's a bad choice. Right.
Well, that's a whole separate story. But I said to him, okay, Mr. President, I'm going to step aside. He's like, no. You have to stay. You're part of the team. You've been, great.
Yeah, right.
He gets a bum rap on loyalty because he actually, for the people that are loyal to him, that fight for him, he stands up for. It's only when you don't honor the commitment that he's made to you that he goes, fine, then I'm going to tell people who you are. But he whether it's you or Brett Kavanaugh or others, he stands by people. And it wasn't.
Yes,
I mean, I was there for the transition when we handled the first batch of nominees. He stands by people where every other politician cuts and runs.
I know. I completely admire.
And you should have been on the Federal Reserve. My God, I think. I mean, can you imagine how much better the economy would be with Steve Moore's voice right now? I mean,
well, maybe, folks. Yeah, hold on, Sean.
Maybe
we got to take a quick break.
Be denying
can I hold you over for about 5 more minutes? I want to hear about your new film.
You bet.
Okay, this is the More Money Show on WABC. We're having fun talking to Sean Spicer, who is one of the real true Trump patriots. And folks, we'll be right back.
This is Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Aaron, thanks for joining us today, man. And, I thought we'd go a little old school. Back in the day, we used to actually dissect someone's actual financial plan and go through it and talk about maybe the flaws or what they could be doing better to be on their track financial independence. I know, Aaron, you worked on a case recently. Why don't you give us the rundown? We could talk about, some of the different things that you were able to do to help this couple get on their path to financial independence.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here, Ryan, Bob. Thanks for having me. So in this case, I was working with a couple in their 70s, retired, had Social Security, they had pensions, and they're working with an advisor that they really just wanted a second opinion. What we found was that in their mid-70s, really, they didn't need a lot of risk or growth at all in the portfolio. They were 70% in the market. And of that, about 30% was concentrated just in large caps, just in the S&P 500.
I know Bob's shocked right now. Bob doesn't know what to say, speechless. But you know what? We're seeing a lot of that right now because the market's really hot and people really want to capture the upside and they forget, guess what? Markets go down too. And when you're 70, it's really no fun when the market actually finally goes down.
Yeah, it's a rude awakening. Thankfully, it's been a while since we've had, an extended bear market like the great financial crisis. But that, we've seen it can really be debilitating to somebody's portfolio. And the other thing with this couple is they were paying almost 1.5% between their advisory fees and the cost of the funds that they were in. So that's really another red flag that I think just a lot of people don't even know where to look or don't pay attention. And they're really shocked when they see something like that.
Well, at times, Aaron, it's a conflict of interest with their advisor. They're, many times in the past, I've had, new clients who've onboarded and they left their old advisor because the old advisor didn't believe in owning bonds because, Warren Buffett didn't own bonds. I mean, like that was their rationale. Or, they just, they were 40 years old. And they said, why would I want to own bonds? Well, their client's 85 or 80. It's like, they apply the same standard. So it's, and look, when the market's moving in one direction, you think it's always going to go in that same direction. That's why I think it's great to have that one report that we run that shows you what would have happened to your portfolio had you been invested the way you are today and a decline like we had in 2000, 2008.
Yeah. I mean, people always forget, guess what? It wasn't that many years ago that the S&P 500 went down like 60%. The great financial crisis wasn't that long ago. I still have scars on my back. And you're starting to see that mentality seep in a little bit. I was speaking to a woman the other day, reviewed her portfolio, like 100% in the market. Everything's in growth. Things like, I think Amazon's her number one position. And she said, I can handle a sell-off. I don't mind being more aggressive. If my portfolio goes down 10%, yeah, I'm good with that. I'm thinking 10%, a portfolio like this, literally in a bad market, go down like 70, 80%. And she had no clue. And I think that's the problem right now is most of us don't realize the underlying risk in our portfolio because like when the tide's in, you don't know who's swimming naked, kind of paraphrase Warren Buffett. And I think that's one of the bigger mistakes we're going to see a lot of people make right now because things are going so well.
One of the things that we see all the time is people don't realize what they need to retire and to reach their goals. This is a perfect example of a couple that we met with. It's like, hey, guys, you really don't need to be taking a lot of risk at all to leave, a couple $1 million in the portfolio at your age is 90 or your age is 100. Why are we putting all this risk on the table and potentially putting you back to work in your 70s?
Well, you know what, Aaron? The nice thing about having gray hair and scar tissue on my stomach lining is I've seen it all before. Have you had a client in the last 10 years brag to you about their largest position being GE? Or has anyone bragged to you about, oh, my God, you can't believe it. I have all my money in a company called Cisco. And, we went through a period of time, which is now the Amazon period now, or the Apple period, or the NVIDIA period, where, this is the same conversation I want to have. Well, why would I ever want to take any money out of GE? It's the greatest stock ever. Well, it didn't go up for 20 years after it halved. Cisco, greatest company ever. Why would I want to buy anything else? Well, it still hasn't gotten back to where it was 20 years ago. So it's amazing, that the markets repeat, but investors never learn. They just don't seem to learn.
Well, that's a great point too, because I think the big question now is like, let's just say you bought NVIDIA and you're up like hundreds of % on that stock. And the same woman I was speaking to, I was just like, this conversation really drove me mad. She said, well, you know what? There's a lot of people, they'll know when to get out ahead of time. I know there's some insiders that'll be able to read the tea leaves and get me out before the stock goes down. I'm like, good luck with that. Good luck with that.
Hey, that's right. Her favorite movie is Wall Street, right? I don't want you giving me information. I want you getting me information. I want you to be illegally providing me insider information.
But the other thing is too, you can get out early, right? If you would have gotten out Cisco even like a year or two before, or 3 years before the stock declined, you would have made it out better than riding it all the way down. And I think that's the bigger message here is no one knows when the party's going to stop. If I did, I'd be on my yacht. And since you don't know when the party's going to stop, the best thing you can do is be proactive, not reactive. And it's okay to be early. You just don't want to be late. And I think that's, again, the big mistake that we're seeing with a lot of portfolios right now is people don't understand the underlying risk. And man, oh man, when parts of the market sell off, if you weren't already proactive about that, you're going to put yourself into really harm's way when it comes to your financial life.
It's even more simple than that. Why do people speculate in individual stocks, right? What's the dream? I'm going to double my money. Well, if you invest in a diversified portfolio that generates just an average market return, you're basically going to double your money every 10 or 12 years. Now, people who invested in Cisco and GE and all the other hot stocks, Intel, they haven't doubled their money. They're probably at half the money they invested. If they had a regular diversified portfolio, they'd have doubled and tripled their money. So it's so ludicrous. Like, why do people think they have to go out and gamble as opposed to invest?
I guess it's more exciting, Bob. I don't know what to tell you, man, but I tell so many people, you hit the lottery, cash out, diversify, because it's great that you just made a couple 100,000 or whatever it is. You doubled your money in a year or two. You're not going to love it, in 2 to 5 years when now your money's cut in half. Cash out.
Yeah. And if you don't need the risk, you have hit the lotto, right? And I saw in this portfolio here, I saw the analysis that you ran. It's like, we're taking less risk. You can increase the income on the portfolio by like $25,000 a year. And that's consistent income that comes in. That's not predicated on, oh my God, is the market going to go up this year? Is it going to go down? Can we predict the future and tell you what you're going to do? It's just like crazy, where you can really, in a place where, let's face it, there's a lot you can't control in the stock market. In a diversified portfolio, you can control the income to some extent, and you can make it very consistent. And when you're building financial independence, that's what you want. You want a consistent income stream. And most of us don't focus on that when we're building our financial independence plan, but it's so critical.
You know, guys, years ago, when I was in one of the other bubbles, not saying there's a bubble now, but we had a statement at the firm I worked for where they would put the total value of your portfolio in big, bold numbers at the very top of the statement. And so when you get into these periods where people don't really start to understand, they don't fully comprehend the stress related to losing half your money on paper. Right. So I would just take this red leaky felt pen and I would cross out their $10 million number on the top of their statement and I'd write down $5 million. And they go, what's that? I said, well, that's your portfolio. If I execute all of your speculative ideas and we have a natural correction somewhere in the next 10 years, how do you feel? I lost half my money. I said, yeah, but you'll stay invested and recover it, right? You won't get depressed. You won't be upset that you've lost $5 million. You're going to stay in the market for another 10 years to get it back. And of course, people say, oh yeah, I'll be brave. And I'm like, no, you won't. So I think that report showing people what can happen, when you hit that inevitable correction and the stress that's involved, the actual stress that's involved when you see you're losing money on paper. You know what happens? They always make it permanent by acting, when they're down the most is when you act.
I really like the old school Bob red pen method. I want to use that.
Yeah. I used to have a lot of dinks back then, Ryan, dual incomes, no kids. Hey, let's roll the dice. We're 45. We're making a ton of money. You don't need to worry about risk.
Yeah. Forget AI and all these fancy new spreadsheets we use. Bob just took that piece of paper, got that red pen and show people what's going to happen. I love it.
Tell you what, it's an effective tool.
If you saved over $1 million for your retirement, myself and Bob and our team at Payne Capital will run for you our total financial master plan, and we'll do that with no obligation or cost. It's a full holistic review. We literally look at everything. There's not a firm out there that will do this work up front. We go as far as building you your own personalized financial portal. We give you a bird's eye view of your entire financial life, and we'll hone in on every financial issue you need to address today, whether it's that income plan for retirement. How do you take Social Security? There's a lot of ways to take it, but one right way for you. How do you draw from your portfolio the most tax efficient way? We'll give you a full income plan, factor in inflation so you don't run out of money. We're going to look at diversification. Markets have been all over the place, up and down. Has your portfolio been extremely volatile? Or have you been sitting in cash? Paralysis by analysis, can't figure out what to do. We'll put together a full diversified investment game plan, show you how to grow your wealth, tie it to your goals, but most importantly, protect it over the rest of your life. And we're going to look at fees and taxes. Wall Street loves to sell you high cost, tax inefficient products, whether it's an annuity, mutual fund, insurance product, brokerage product. We're going to go through every investment you have, deep dive. We're going to show you how to reduce all the internal cost and optimize your portfolio for taxes. It's not what you make, it's what you take. You'll get our full tax playbook. We literally have 4 slots left. If you saved over $1 million for your retirement, all you need to do is call or text at 844-752-6692. That's 844-752-6692. If you call or text us right now at 844-752-6692, that's 844-PLAN-NYC, 844-PLAN-NYC. Hey, if you want to know more about myself and Bob and our firm, Payne Capital Management, simply go to BeBullish.com.